SocialStudiesGames.us. This is Unit 6, Video 4. As always, the videos are based on the AP U.S. History Guidelines. Today, your goal, evaluate the effectiveness of labor protests. So you're going to look at the labor protests as I talk about them and decide yourself, did it work or did it not work? But you can't just say yes or no. You should be able to give evidence and provide examples of, well, this is how they can work, or this is how they failed. Also, give examples of labor fighting against owners. I'm going to give you 4 specific examples of major labor protests. You should be able to list them and describe those major protests. So at the beginning of the turn of the century, we're going from about the 1900s. We're going from the 1800s to the 1900s, so basically around 1900, late 1880s, whichever time period you want. Demand for goods is up. We're going through an industrial revolution. There are mass manufacturing, and people want stuff. So for our example, we'll talk about shoes. People want shoes. Popping tags. So the shoe factory is rocking and rolling. They're making shoes, but they're not making enough because, as I mentioned, the demand for manufactured goods is through the roof. People want it, so you better keep making it because if you make more, you'll sell more, you make money, get rich. So you got to make more shoes, but the only way to keep up with the demand was the factory had to run 24 hours a day. And not only did the factory have to run 24 hours a day, but they needed the workers to be there 24 hours a day. That seems ridiculous. How is that possible? That's no way that someone can work 24 hours. It's hard enough just to stay up for 24 hours. Well, you rewind the clock 100 years ago, a little bit more. That's what happened. Today, you're like, well, that's not right. You can't make somebody work 24 hours. No, it's not right today. And no, it's not legal today. But then it was. And you could make them work 24 hours. Not only did you make them work 24 hours, but working conditions were dangerous. That is not a doctored image. That is not photoshopped. That is not CGI. That is the real thing. There are no harnesses. There are no ropes. There is not a safety net underneath those workers. This is simply the way it was. Obviously, things have changed today. Now, if I spill a little bit of coffee in the break room, I've got to put a giant yellow sign that says, "There's coffee on the floor. Everyone watch out." Back then, these dudes are hundreds of stories off the ground just chilling. The only safety net is the dude next to you. Now, imagine you have been working for 24 hours. I'm getting a little tired. Gosh, I could just go for laying my head down. And then the next thing you know, your head's on the concrete 100 stories down. I'll save you the gory details. How about this? You want to try to understand unsafe working conditions in a factory? How about the most unsafe working place environment, the most dangerous factory in the world, Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. You got Veruca Salt. You got the one dude that falls into the river of chocolate, I believe. Augustus Gloop gets stuck in the pipe, and then the one girl turns into a gumball drop. Definitely a very dangerous working environment. The Willy Wonka needs to put in some safety measures. This is really not safe for the Oompa Loompas. It's not safe for the visitors. And if Willy Wonka isn't going to change things, then maybe the government needs to regulate it. But hey, 120 years ago, the government was laissez-faire. Remember, hands off. The government's not going to tell Willy Wonka what to do. Wonka, you just make your chocolate, no questions asked. We're not going to get involved. And if you run a bad business and a bunch of kids get murdered, then guess what? People are going to stop working there, right? If it's really dangerous, if people are turning into gumballs, they're going to say, you know what, probably not going to go work at the Wonka factory. I don't want to be a gumball. And that's the theory of, well, the government doesn't have to get involved because if it's dangerous, people aren't going to do it. And so Wonka is going to have to clean up and make his own place safe. That's one theory. But that doesn't always work because it's like, well, some of these people are so desperate for a job that they aren't worried that they're going to get sucked into a pipe and possibly die because they got to feed their kids. They're desperate. And in that situation, maybe you should have the government involved. So we're going to talk about when these workers are desperate and these workers are being abused and the rules are against them and everything is wrong, what they typically do then and what workers typically do now is they collectively come together. Imagine all the workers at a fast food restaurant or all the workers at the furniture factory coming together, collectively using their power to ask or demand changes, specifically in this case for shorter work days and for safer working conditions. They're not asking that much, things that we take for granted today. We have them now, but we did not used to have them, and we owe these changes today, or we owe the safety measures and the less hours that we have today to the men and women who decided 100 years ago, enough is enough. We need some changes. So one of the examples of how workers can come together and demand change or try to ask for change is they go on strike. What is strike? Well, so they leave the work, they leave the factory, and they refuse to work anymore. And this is an example of picketing. You're carrying it. Not only are you not working, you're making sure that you're calling attention to, we ain't working. And we're appealing to the public, and we're appealing to our bosses. So it's one thing just to not show up, but we are intentionally not showing up, and we're telling you right now, we are not going to show up, and we're outside. We're literally at work, but not going into work. This is the picket line. The line outside of the factory. Let me see if I can just draw a line. Now, there's not literally a line in the ground, but the line between going in and working and the line outside, possibly on the outside of a fence, walking around, carrying a sign, picketing. You might have seen this in real life. That's the picket line. And they're protesting, and they are not going to work until changes are made, mainly safer working conditions. So here's the thing, and this is very effective in theory. So again, you're trying to evaluate the effectiveness. Is this a good strategy for the workers? Yes, no, well, let's play this out. So the strikers, they're not working. And when they're not working, the factory has to close because they're not in there making shoes. They're not running the machines. They're not sewing the shoes together. They're not putting the shoes in the boxes. They're not putting the shoes in the back of a truck, and they're not shipping the shoes out. No shoes being made. And if you're not making shoes, you can't sell shoes. That means you're not getting those bags. You can't make money. This is bad for the factory. This is bad for the factory owner. This hurts. Every minute of every hour of every day that factory is not working is costing the boss money. Remember, we were having to run this thing 24 hours a day to keep up with the demand. And maybe your shoe company is competing against Reebok, or you're competing against Nike. And when your shoe business is not running and you're not making shoes, people are buying their shoes and people are liking their brand. And people are starting to say, you know what, I'm going to start buying Nikes from now on, or I'm going to start buying Reeboks from now on, or I'm going to be all about Adidas because I like these shoes. I never would have tried these shoes if it wasn't for that shoe company shutting down. So this is bad for your business. You cannot have it shut down. You got to do something. So, our old pal, the scab. What's a scab? Well, scab is a pejorative. It is a term used to make this guy look bad. The poor scab. Well, here's the poor scab. These guys are not working. Well, this guy, he really needs a job. He's got a wife. He's got 2 kids. His wife's pregnant. He's got rent to pay. He needs a job desperately, and he doesn't care if he's got to work 24 hours, and he doesn't care if it's not safe. He's desperate. And so the scab crosses the picket line, and the scab goes into work. And the scab doesn't care that these guys want safer working conditions. The scab's got bills to pay. And the scab doesn't care that they're upset about 24-hour workdays. And the scab doesn't care if this is a protest across the country to demand better rights for all workers in this nation. Because the scab is too busy paying his rent, feeding his kids, taking care of his own life. He's got bigger problems. And so as the scab goes into work, guess what? The factory reopens. All right, we're making shoes again, and we're making more shoes. And when you're making shoes, you're getting those bags. And the factory is back running. Meanwhile, the guys are out dancing around, holding the signs. We want this, we want that. All right, well, you can want it all you want, but we're fine in here because we didn't give it to this guy. And we're actually probably paying him less than we paid you. So you keep striking, and we'll keep working. Eventually, these guys right here and right here and right here, they realize, because when you're on strike, you're not working. And when you're not working, you're not getting paid. And when you're not getting paid, you're not paying your bills. You're not taking care of your kids. You can't go to the grocery. You can't do anything because you don't have any money. And eventually, if you strike for a day, I'm Gucci. If you strike for a week, all right, well, that's just one paycheck. I'm still okay. After 2 weeks, getting a little tight. Week 3, you're opening the cabinet and there's nothing there. Week 4, you're hunting for dead rats and certain. No, you're probably not doing that. You're not cooking dead rats for dinner. But it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. And so eventually they say, all right, We lose. We'll go back. We'll work 24 hours. We'll work in unsafe conditions. Whatever. And then these jokers, they go. They don't have a job anymore. Now, this is not an exaggeration. We see this. Fast food workers in your small town. Imagine that you're fast food workers at McDonald's decide we're going to strike for $15. Well, here's exactly what will happen. They'll dance around and they'll strike outside of the McDonald's and demand higher wages. And McDonald's will hire new people. And eventually those guys striking will either come back or those guys striking will go home and never come back. And so sometimes the strikes work. And sometimes the owners say, all right, we'll listen to you. We'll cut down the hours sometimes. And then a lot of times the owner just waits out the strike, patiently waiting, because the owner usually are pretty wealthy. They've got money saved up. And so if they're not making money, that's okay. They planned on this event happening eventually. They were waiting for this day. And so although the factory is not running and it is hurting their business, they can deal with it. It's a different story for the strikers. A lot of times the strikers, they didn't save up money because they were unable to save money because they weren't getting paid that much money in the first place. It's not like, oh, we're cool. I can wait out 2 months of this strike. No, you can't. The reason you're striking is because you didn't have any money in the first place. All right, the Scav. This is a real little passage by American author Jack London. After God had finished the rattlesnake, the toad, and the vampire, he had some awful stuff left with which he made a scab. A scab is a two-legged animal with a corkscrew soul, a waterlogged brain, and a combination backbone made of jelly and glue. Where others have hearts, he carries a tumor of rotten principles. Judas Iscariot was a gentleman compared to a scab. For betraying his master, he had the character to hang himself. The scab hasn't. There is nothing lower than a scab. And so this is the scab. This is the guy that crossed the picket line. He agreed to work for less. Look, you can defend the scab if you want, because look, the scab's got bills to pay. But when the scab crosses the picket line to pay the bills, he betrays his fellow workers. That's what Jack London is saying. Look, we get it, scab, that you had to pay your bills. And you thinking about yourself and your family. And that's understandable. But what is not understandable is that you have betrayed your fellow man. You have betrayed your fellow workers. And in doing so, the rights of workers will never advance. Let's look at another example of how you can stop a strike. So we gave an example. You can use the scabs to break up a strike, or you can simply hire the police to kick people out. Arrest them, throw them away, boom, done. And that's happened before. They just bring in the police and say, look, if you're not working, fine, then you need to get off of my property. Now, you have the right to protest as long as you're on public property, but if you're trying to protest on private property, a lot of times the owner will say, you know what, if you're not working, then get out of here. Another example, another trick that a lawyer can do, so we're talking an owner can do, although some of them may be lawyers, is a lockout. This is kind of a reverse. So a strike was where the workers were upset. They refused to work because they want changes. Well, sometimes the owner is upset. You're like, what could the owner be upset about? Well, when you're the boss, you can do whatever you want. And sometimes the boss wants to pay you less. And what the boss will do, and we've seen this with the NBA and the NFL and the NHL, where the bosses or the owners of the sports team decided, we're paying you guys too much, so we're going to lock our doors. And they literally lock the doors to the gymnasiums, and they lock their doors to the stadiums. They lock their doors to the arenas and say the players can't come in. You cannot come to work until you accept lower wages. And the workers are like, we want to work. We want to work. Yeah, of course you do, for the money that you were getting paid before. But those days are gone. I don't want to pay you $1 million a year anymore. I want to pay you $500,000. Sorry, I'm tired. I'm paying you too much. We need to make cuts. And they will lock you out. And we see this in regular businesses too, where the factory, the boss decides, I can't pay you $15 an hour anymore. We're not making enough money. I need you to take less. And the workers say, no, I'm not taking a pay cut. And so the boss will say, all right, fine, it's a lockout. And he will literally lock the doors and say, no one can come